That will never work. You can't push that. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's everything you do. That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to talk? Stop. Be happy. You don't bother me. I've seen better. Do you really want to do that? And my third grade, give it up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this. Welcome to episode 44 of Horrible Writing. I'm your host, Paul Sading, and I have another writer interview today, folks. This time, it's audio dramatist Anthony Rocco Oliveri from the 2298 podcast. Anthony, welcome to Horrible Writing, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is an honor.
This is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be a topic I don't think people who don't do it get very easily. You and I belong to the same audio drama community, the same network, actually, the Fate Crafters Network. And even when I posed the question posed that I was going to be interviewing you about this, there was some quizzical responses to what we're talking about today. So it's going to be, I think we're going to really be able to help a lot of people who don't necessarily leverage the tactic that you and I both leverage to kind of understand why in the world we do it and what it's all about anyway. So listeners, yeah. Anthony's been kind enough to come on Horrible Writing because he does something that I do quite often. And you may be wondering what that is. Those of you who've listened from the very beginning or who have ever just simply checked out the podcast artwork are very attuned to the fact that it's called Horrible Writing by nature or by title, but there's also a subtitle that says, and whining. And it's just a self-deprecating jab at myself in my writing. And I think a lot of writers do that for ourselves. And a lot of folks don't get it. And even when I've had or requested interviews with some writers, they've been resistant to coming on a podcast called Horrible Writing. And I have been looking for the longest time for someone to talk about this with that wasn't me. I can talk about these things to the end of the day, but you don't need to hear my opinion on this matter. You need to hear somebody else, a fresh voice, who does the same type of thing, different way of doing it, but same type of thing. So, Anthony, that's what we're here to discuss today is self-deprecation. So for you, as a creative, and we are going to talk about your show here later on in the interview like we always do, but right. In the context of the show, you've got a dystopic future world. It's dark, it's dreary, it's really depressing, and I'm wondering how much of this plays into that. So we're going to have, we'll get into that chat in a little bit. But when it comes to self-deprecation, to ground everybody at the same starting point, what is it to you? What does it look like, if you will?
So self-deprecation to me would just be sort of being unable to compliment yourself or ever feel like you've accomplished something that you actually set out to accomplish. You always feel like there's something that could have been better, something that you fell short on doing. I actually talked to Sarah from Girl in Space about this. She called it imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really acute too, because that is what it feels like, like when I am self-deprecating, it's because I don't feel like I deserve any sort of or praise or anything like that. And it's not because I don't feel like I've tried hard. In fact, that self-deprecation sometimes pushes me to try harder because I want to be so perfect and I want to try so hard because I want to prove that voice wrong. It's just I can never make it go away. And I think a lot of us have it. And like I said, it drives a lot of us to work harder and, maybe to create these environments that we can use to make ourselves feel better about it, but it never really goes away for me anyway.
And that's an interesting comment about that. I know a lot of creatives struggle with that imposter voice. they don't necessarily, I don't want to speak for you. For me, it's kind of like a release of that pressure, of that, not accountability, because like what you just said, I have that drive and desire to prove that voice wrong. But I think for me, in part, being self-deprecating, calling this show Horrible Writing, picking on the garbage that I do put out there in the world sometimes, and I could have done better kind of thing. But I feel it's a healthier way for me to keep that balance before I completely crush my creative spirit. For you, is it along, do you feel, have you ever sat back, analyzed, and thought about it? Is that what this does for you as well, or does it serve a different purpose?
Part of it is that. I will agree with you that part of it is that, but part of it to me is also, not wanting to accept it for sort of self-preservation purposes. When I see certain fans or talk to certain fans, first of all, to even say I have fans makes me feel awkward because it makes me feel like I'm undeserving, but also when I talk to some of them and they use words like brilliance or, you know what I mean? Like say things like, changed how they think. And like phrases like that are not, I don't take those lightly at all. Like those, when I reply, I don't feel like words can even do it justice because like it really does impact me in such a way because I am so self-deprecating. But I think sometimes the self-deprecation serves as also protection from ever believing that myself, right? Believing my own hype, getting an ego about myself, relaxing my own standards, thinking whatever I do is, amazing. And so I think in some ways it is beneficial. I think it does have some benefits, as weird as that is to say, like self-loathing can be beneficial, but it can be, I think.
I don't disagree with you at all. And I think any listener can, when you said that, when you made that comment, I think any listener could probably think of a creative person who started believing their own hype, or a musician, right? They struggled for 10 years playing in crappy clubs, and they had that one song that just skyrocketed them. And then, album after album after that was garbage. And you almost kind of, like you said, you relax on those standards, if you start believing that. And, it's a sharpened tool. What kind of tools are we putting in our toolbox to keep that creative element sharp and focus? I don't disagree with you on that. And I do agree with you. I laughed. Listeners, we're doing a video interview. Unfortunately, you all can't see this. You wouldn't want to anyways. Not that Anthony's a great looking guy. Me, not so much. But he talked about fans, and I started laughing. I tried to cover it so I didn't disrupt him when he was, trying to focus on an answer. But it's the same thing. If you look at my social media feed, I say listeners by far much more often than I'll ever say fans. If I say fans on Twitter, it's because it's a character limitation factor. I'm with you, Anthony. Podcasting for almost 7 years now, and I avoid that word like the plague. It's a 4-letter word, no joke, metaphorically and literally. So I stay away from it.
I'm your fan, Paul.
Oh, stop. All right, so give us, when I have guests on Horrible Writing, and listeners love this. One of the things that guests do is they really open up to who they are as a person. So for you, when it comes to self-deprecation, is this just your general disposition in life, or is this something that maybe even you've discovered is kind of restricted to your creative pursuits?
I think sadly, if you asked most people who knew me, they'd say it's pretty throughout my character, in that it's not that my parents were never that way. Society hasn't really made me that way. I grew up in, the late 80s, early 90s. And so like I was told I can be anything I wanted, right? All that other kind of stuff. I didn't, I didn't live too affluently, but I wasn't poor in any sort of way. My parents always encouraged me. So like, I have no reason to not believe in myself or doubt myself, right? Like there's nothing I can point to and say that, that has, affected me, which I'm super lucky and fortunate to be able to say. And I think what has happened is when I say that, like, I've tried to write something and never finished until I started audio drama, that is true. And so I think a lot of my own self-disappointments, right? Like, I think the times where I wasn't able to follow through on things that I wanted to, or, did things in a way that I regret, I think it's created this, like we spoke about before, voice or person or attitude of, you know what? Remember the things you've done wrong, right? I actually even have tattooed on me, "All I know is I know nothing" by Socrates, right? Like in ancient Greek or whatever, because I wanted it to be in whatever I thought he might have spoke it in. And, I minored in philosophy and stuff like that. But it's also very much so a check yourself, Anthony, right? Like reminder, never believe in yourself, but never believe in yourself to a point where you think you can do and know anything. Mm-hmm. And maybe sometimes I take that to a little bit of an extreme, right? And that's what this is sort of about, this conversation.
Right. And I don't want to gloss over any of this. I mean, I know I deliberately use it, and obviously one of the reasons why we're here together is because we've had this conversation on the side, that you are aware of that in yourself as well. But there's a definite utility to it. And I think through our conversation and through you sharing so much of what, who you've been and who you are, that it's going to help other writers who maybe not necessarily so aware of what they're doing or what they could do, and allow themselves to get away with, and then keep that frame so that there's always that balance, or the best balance that they can maintain. I think that's so critical as a creative, because we work in this vacuum, and someone like you for $22.98, it's you and you doing that show. So you're, right. You're in that creative space, and and all alone in that silo too. So if you were ever to get out of balance, that could have runaway implications, because there's nobody on that creative team, to pull you back in and say, "All right, Anthony." So it's important to keep that. And as writers, it doesn't matter if you're an audio dramatist, or if you're a poet, or if you're working on that novel and you're in that office all alone all the time working on this thing. I think it's imperative that whether or not you see utility right now in self-deprecation after this conversation, I hope you understand the importance that it can be healthy, and that there is a balance that can be struck. And hopefully we'll reinforce it as we go along. So let's talk about, let's remove the demons as best you can, Anthony.
Okay.
Give us an example or a time, and when you've looked at your self-deprecating behaviors and your brand, the creative stuff that you're putting out there in the world, whether it be on social media or in an episode or in a message in the episode, whatever it may be. Think about a time when you've done that and it hasn't necessarily conveyed the message that you wanted it to, maybe even been harmful to the brand. Can you think of a time when something like that happened, and kind of give us an idea of what happened and what was the consequence, the fallout from that?
Well, the brand is so new. I can't think of a specific time where I can say it's harmed the brand, but there have been several times where I've done it just as a natural reaction and been self-deprecating in nature in a response, whether it be in a direct message or in a Twitter response, and thought to myself, that kind of makes me look bad. Mm-hmm. In that, the phrase, like, if you don't believe in yourself, who is going to believe in you, right? And I sort of, that's the counterbalance to the self-deprecation argument. And like you said, the balance to be struck, where you certainly want to be humble, you certainly want to keep yourself in check, but you want to be confident at the same time. And so there have been times where I don't think I've harmed myself, but in conversations with, like, I've direct messaged certain people I don't want to, sort of name drop, but like creators in audio drama who I've asked advice or something like that. And in the way I did it, reading it back, it sort of seems like a kid almost, or like someone who's selling himself short, or, not giving themselves enough credit. And it's like, if I read that, would I want to listen to their audio drama? Like, would I want to listen to somebody who says something like that? And so I definitely understand what you mean in that. I'm not sure it's harmed the brand necessarily because it's so young, but I could see how it could.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. I think one of the interesting things I was thinking as you were replying was I could almost hear the self-deprecation in your answer about the deprecating actions.
Yeah.
I mean, because you and I had started messaging basically almost as soon as you were out there as a 2298 brand. And I never, and maybe it's because I get on a subconscious level, I always got where your style, your approach could come from, because that's where I start. I don't know, but it never came across that way. So it was entertaining to me as you were answering, because I was like, yeah, no, and I remember when he was a wee lad.
Yeah, you definitely do.
What are when you look at your, like that example right there, that's a good example. So when you reflect on those past experiences, or as you're living in the moment again, and you feel yourself starting to maybe possibly cross that threshold into being misunderstood, coming across the wrong way, what are some of the warning signs for you personally where you see that self-deprecating behavior becoming unhealthy or striking an unhealthy balance?
I think it's when you make it excessive, when you make it continuous, and it becomes almost belaboring, because nobody wants to have to constantly reinforce and remind someone that they're good or that they like them, right? Like if you've ever been in a relationship with someone and all they do is talk about how terrible they are, eventually you might believe them, there isn't, again, another phrase, not to pull out, I'm just full of phrases today, when people tell you about themselves, believe them, right? Or when someone tells you the truth about themselves, believe them. And so I don't know. I think about these, again, this is almost a self-deprecating answer within a, question about self-deprecation. But again, that's just the way my brain works. And so I could see how at a certain point it might become, tiresome to have to always remind someone like, no, you're good. No, you're doing all right. And Sarah is, again, a great person who's always like, outside of, people who are fans of the show and stuff like that. But in Fatecrafter specifically, she's always like noticing when I'm in those kind of states and like sending me little messages like, you're doing great. And I, those things mean a lot to me.
She is good about that. She really is. There's no joke. She's very tuned into the people in her world, which speaks volumes to her, which is why everybody loves her. So how do you self-correct then? When you see yourself or you feel yourself going, and I know I'm presupposing that you actually have that awareness, so if you don't, please correct me. But when you see yourself going in that direction, you feel yourself becoming cumbersome, burdensome to someone else, what do you do to self-correct in the moment?
In the moment, what I try to do, honestly, is something like maybe lately what I've been doing is I've been looking at like download statistics and telling myself this many people cannot think you're terrible. Right. Do you know what I mean? And like, it seems weird, but that sometimes helps. What I'll do is there are a couple episodes that I really like. I think as creators, we largely marginalize our work into like a couple points here or there that we think are good, And so, for me, there's a couple episodes that I'll listen to and I'll be like, okay, I don't know how you pulled this off, but this is pretty good. So, in those moments, I feel I pull myself back a little bit.
So here's what I want to pull out of that for all listeners, because Anthony and I have the advantage of having audio drama out there in the world. So our feedback, our validation, kind of like what he was talking about, is almost immediate. He can go out to his podcast host and he can see how many folks have given his stories a chance. You may be sitting there with your draft of a novel that's 10 months away from ever seeing the light of day to the world, and you may not have that ability to get that self or that validation immediately. But I thought, Anthony, that it was such a good piece of advice. Doesn't matter if you don't have a podcast where you can look at the downloads and go, thousands of people actually think I'm okay. You've got that story, and that's what Anthony was sharing right there. Is he'll go back to his own creation in his own headspace and find something of value that he appreciates in what he created. And Anthony, I think that was such a critical thing to say, because it's going to help. It's going to be helpful to folks who aren't as lucky as we are to actually have our stories out there in the world. It's about finding what you can do with what you've got to keep that, check and balance, everything in balance, folks, everything in balance.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. And tangentially, can I say, if you are someone out there who is like halfway done writing something and you are stuck on it, make it an audio drama and just start recording the pieces you have. And once you get up to a point where you haven't like finished, you'll be propelled to finish, because that's exactly what happened to me. Like I wasn't done and I was like, I'm just going to start recording this anyway. And it propelled me to finish, because I feel like audio drama is able to put you in a space that helps you finish things because you can see them.
Right. No, I absolutely agree with you. I totally agree with you on that point. I try to sell this to a lot of my writer friends at my local writers group, and I think it can be intimidating for folks on the outside looking at what we do. But I agree with you in that piece of advice. I really do. We've got to, and folks, by the way, let me just take a moment here, since we're about 20 some odd minutes into the interview. I want to drop a little teaser in your lap too. Anthony mentioned his work, 2298. I feel it's a dystopic sci-fi show. Anthony, you may describe it differently, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But for everybody listening, if you are already a patron of any one of my shows, obviously, if you're a patron of one, you get all of them. I don't know why I say that, but I do. Or if you're a patron of 2298, so you're one of Anthony's patrons, you're going to get a set of exclusive questions that I've got for Anthony. So you're going to definitely want to stay tuned. At the end of this episode, I'll be signing off for the public, and then Anthony and I are going to hang out and do a couple questions that way. So make sure you hang around for that exclusive content, because we're going to talk not only about 2298 in the public version, but we're going to go into it a little more in that exclusive version. I'm excited. My new thriller book is out on Amazon. It's called Chasing the Demon. It's an adaptation of the first season of Subject Found podcast. Join Jared Strong as he pursues a childhood demon across the Pacific Northwest, a failing marriage, a group of people who don't want him to be doing the work he's doing, and a creature that doesn't want to be found. With a new beginning, a new end, and a whole bunch of new story elements in the middle, this is a new story of Jared Strong. Head over to Amazon today, pick up your copy of Chasing the Demon. And while you're at it, for less than $1, you can also pick up my new short horror story called The Plant. Let's get back to the conversation. So this question... Spoilers. This question comes from a gentleman known as Dohai. He is also part of the Fate Crafters Network, and he is the writer for the second season of Diary of a Madman, which, yes, I'm still working on. But he has a question for you about self-deprecation, Anthony. Here it goes. Okay. He says, how do you motivate yourself to continue in the face of undermining your own work?
Well, first of all, shout out to Dohai. I love that. Anyway.
Yes.
So, but how it's sort of in the same way that I was saying before, where I try to find something of value within what I've done so far. And it's one of those things, even though I'm self-deprecating, there are people who are not towards me. There are people who are praising. There are people who are, reinforcing and encouraging and stuff like that. And so it's for them. Do you know what honestly, if I put out the first couple of episodes and there wasn't a response, I'm not sure what would have happened. And so what I do this for is for people who are listening, who tell me they're anticipating it, who tell me they really like it. That's how I sort of maintain, going on in the face of what I think about myself, right? Like if it were up to me, yeah, I'm not sure I would have been able to maintain, to be completely honest.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm saying that's where, that those tips, tools, and tactics come in again, folks, in helping yourself out. So because you obviously get this, you've done it, like you said, people who know you even in your personal life would probably nod their head and say, yeah, that's how Anthony is. So what is it with all that life experience behind you that people misunderstand about the utility of being self-deprecating? In your own opinion, I mean, there is no wrong answer, right? So what is it that people just don't get, or they just misunderstand about how self-deprecation does have utility? It does serve a purpose.
I think what people misunderstand is that when you're self-deprecating towards yourself, you're not doing it because you want to. You're not doing it because you think it's cool, or you're not being contrarian purposefully. You're doing it because it feels right to you, and you desperately, I feel like as a self-deprecating person, you desperately want the other person to understand how you feel. That's at the core of it all, is that you want them to feel that you don't feel a certain way. You want them to feel in their hearts that you don't think you're this great, amazing person. It's like you're kind of just like making sure that, right? Like I don't think that way about myself, right? And so I don't know what that is, but I think the utility in that comes in that no one will ever mistake you for that type of person. No one could ever really be like, Anthony's arrogant. Because if they ever knew me, they'd know, how can I be arrogant? There's no person I undercut more than myself. So like, it's something that, at least in that sense, I could never be labeled as, I'm not going to be cast in Gaston in Beauty and the Beast anytime soon. Let's just put it that way.
I don't know. With that voice, I disagree. You might be an awesome Gaston.
Wait till you hear my French accent before you do that.
Well, and I think that's so. God, I just love that answer because I'm guilty of it myself. I've said that, and I worry about the reaction I get from people too. That it's me seeking validation, and it's not whatsoever. So your answer was, I was nodding my head because I was like, yeah, exactly. I put out a tweet yesterday because to my patrons and to my newsletter subscribers, I asked for volunteers for advanced reader copies or copy readers for my book that's coming out in a couple months, Chasing the Demon. And the amount of attention, and all I did was tweet that, essentially I'm so lucky to have people in my life who support me, who I've never met, probably will never meet. And just a reminder to the general universe that, I know the internet can be ugly, but it also has an inherent beauty to it. And I keep getting these, and this is no fault to anyone because I know there's a couple of you who are going to hear this episode. I keep getting these, when I read them, these responses that are like trying to convey how much I'm appreciated by other people. And that's not what I saw when I put that tweet out. So when you answered that question, it was so apropos to what I'm going through right now is I feel icky. I wasn't asking for validation. I just wanted you all to know that I love you all. And
Yeah.
you know, there was a positivity. So it's so great, such a great answer, because it's simply, you know, just a statement of, I feel, like you just said, how we feel. It is not a casting a line out into the ocean. Please tell me how awesome I am.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's, I almost didn't like, I almost didn't start like making download posts, right? Like, oh, I've reached this, you know, not, I almost never did that because of that same reason. I didn't want it to be seen as that. But then I was like, you know what? These aren't mine, right? This has nothing to do with me. This isn't mine. This is their celebration of their show that they love. Sure, I make it, but it's really as little to do with me as possible. It's a celebration of them. But I totally get what you mean.
Yeah, I'm with you, and that's a great example, because to this day I still don't put milestone marker celebrations out there.
Yeah.
I'll put out when it's broken a record. I'll mention that, but I won't put out like
a marker.
Gates, like a marker, because I still have an issue with it, and I realize that's my personal bias and my personal person. But you're right. You know, once we put those stories out there, we no longer own 100% of those stories.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. We make them fall in love with our world. We make them fall in love with our characters. They take ownership in that stuff. And that's, I mean, what a beautiful exchange, right?
I love it.
I think that's the coolest thing about being a creator is you know, but where other people are so invested in what you've created that they claim ownership, at least in part of it. So let's talk about that creative. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to ask about the that creative and critical balance for you. How does this, you as a creator, when you're sitting there at the keyboard in front of that mic or in front of your production software, when you're starting to mix everything together to create that world, how does this self-deprecating attitude facilitate and enhance your creativity?
I'm not sure it enhances the creativity so much as it enhances the work ethic. You know, it just enhances, if I have to sit here and say this line or this word 1,000 times until it sounds the way I want it to sound, I will do that, right? Or I will sit here and use as much time as I have available to me and use every single second and minute of it to make sure that this is perfect. Because one thing that it does help is that it also teaches you what you're doing wrong, because you're very keenly focusing in on it. Mm-hmm. So one day I tweeted something like, you know, why am I so stupid in breathing all the time, or something like that? Like, because I'm always having to edit out breaths and weird mouth clicks. And it's like, sometimes I'll say a word and wonder, wait, how did my tongue even make a click noise on that word? There's no click letter. Like, and I'll have to re-record it, but it's that attention to detail that is both my gift and my curse, because I'm always looking out for something to pick on.
Okay. So how does that play into criticism you receive? So this is not me asking you about your own criticisms of your work, but any constructive or otherwise, right? Any criticisms that you get externally.
Funnily enough, with that, it's sort of my favorite thing to happen. You know, I don't know if you know Will on, you know, she has a podcast and she does podcast reviews.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and she's brilliant. She is and listens to so much audio drama and knows so much stuff, and it's just so amazing that I've asked her for advice before, you know, just constructive criticism. Like I read what her reviews are and what her scores are on my episode, and if I see my score go down, I message and ask, hey, you know, what can I do better? Like I'm that guy. And so, you know, she's and she has actual services that you can use too, that you can like get. And I encourage, especially new, you know, audio dramatists to get into stuff like this, especially if they're self-deprecating, because I think the best thing someone who's self-deprecating can do is get constructive criticism from someone, because when they hear that criticism can be constructive and praiseworthy at the same time, it's not so bad. And it, for some reason, it validates certain things that I think about myself and then makes me think about, okay, well, I was right about that one thing, but she said this other thing that I thought wasn't that great was actually pretty good. So since you validated one but didn't validate the other, maybe it is me, you know? And so I think sometimes constructive criticism is actually really, really important. And I'm not sure what audio dramatists are doing in their free time. I'm a very Twitter only person, so I was going to say on Twitter, but I don't know if people are getting messages and, sending out messages and stuff like that, and doing these consults that certain reviewers and bloggers have. But I would personally do it, because I think that there's something to that. And when I wasn't seeking it out, I didn't get it anywhere else. That's interesting.
So, okay, so now I'm going to put you on the spot with that. I'm going to try to put you on the spot with that.
Please.
Because I love asking difficult questions, because, I'm such a good host. I'm like, hey, come on my show so I can just publicly put you in a tight corner. Yeah. Folks, that's a joke. I would never do that to my guests. So in that respect, though, that's you, and you've got a healthy balance. What about that creative who is struggling to keep that balance? Okay, so they're not dealing with their self-deprecation as well as you may be, or are they just not even aware of it? What are some of the things that they can do to help themselves? What do you look for when you reach out and you seek that constructive criticism? What are some of the criteria that you use to select the people that you're actually asking for the constructive criticism from?
Well, I like them to be reviewers or bloggers rather than other creators. And my reason for that is just because as creators, we have very strong opinions about how art should be made. And so I think that since most creators also aren't as big of fans of the art they create, which I think is sometimes surprising to the fans of that art. When you create art, we've talked about this, you can't listen to as many of your peers because you don't want to be influenced by them, or you're just too busy making your own art that you just don't have time. And so I think what I seek out are the fans, the reviewers, the bloggers, the people who are actually going to consume it. That's who I want. Like, tell me, what do you like? What don't you like? I'm not going to explicitly or implicitly give you exactly that, but I certainly want that information and I want to take it into account. And I am the type of person who may give you 80 to 90% of what you are asking for, with my own little then sort of twist and signature on it.
Yeah, and I think that's important because and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't a shooting by the hip type of approach by you. I mean, you're keeping your eye on the landscape to see who you would approach anyways, right?
Yes. I also pay very close attention to who I'm following and who follows me and who follows who, and who are fans of what. That's why I stuck to one platform only, because it is somewhat exhausting sometimes, because yes. I do have to make sure I'm on and paying attention and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't imagine doing it on Facebook and Instagram and all these things. That's why, I give kudos to anyone who can do multi-platform. But that's why for me on Twitter, what I really do is I look at, okay, this person is a blogger and reviewer, and they're a big fan of these type of shows. I think I can maybe fit in that category loosely. And so this might be someone I would approach. And that's kind of how I just think about it.
And that's, I mean, being analytical about that, especially in the context of us talking about self-deprecation, I feel is, from two people who are actually out there putting their stories out there. It's the responsible thing to recommend to anybody who's listening to this and seeking this stuff out is, ironic for a person who just highlighted the fact that he was talking about the beauty of the internet, but there are people out there that probably would be counterproductive to draw constructive criticism from if you're not sure what the source is. So that's why I wanted to ask you that follow-up, was just to make sure that we, contextualize it for folks in that regard, because it can be tricky. It really can be.
Absolutely.
So at this point of the discussion, what I like to do, so if you're a first-time listener, you may not even be aware. You won't be aware if this is your first episode. Welcome. But what I like to do at this point when I bring writers on is ask them for a horrible writing experience that they have had themselves. Now, this isn't something cruel that I like to do to torture them on the spot. There is actually a learning objective from this. Trust me, I try desperately to not make this experience awkward for anybody. You, the listener, my guest, or even me, myself. So, Anthony, at this point in the show, it's about time that you shared your horrible writing experience with the audience. What horrible writing experience have you had?
I've had several horrible writing experiences. The one that honestly comes to mind was, and I thought it was most apt for this conversation, was the experience that precluded making this audio drama in the first place, which is that for years, on and off, I had this idea and these pages written, and for some reason, I would always delete them and then rewrite them and delete them and then rewrite them. And I did that because of my self-deprecating nature. Every time I came back, I hated everything I wrote. And what I think happens is when you are really self-deprecating, you're a major editor of what you do. And sometimes you're editing with a chainsaw, and sometimes you're editing with an atomic bomb where you just delete the whole thing entirely. And that's what I would continuously do because of just my self-loathing nature and thinking that everything I was doing was terrible. Until this bird started following me. And that sounds really weird because it was weird. And what happened was there are just these type of birds in New Jersey that are common. And for some reason, I kept seeing just one of them. It obviously wasn't the same bird, but I would always see just one and there wouldn't be any others anywhere. And it started to really freak me out. And so it merged with this story that I was writing originally. And then I started listening to audio drama because a friend of mine told me to listen to it. And I started listening to, Subject Found and The Once and Future Nerd. And, it changed everything for me. And so that's why I had to add that tangential, point before when you were talking about, when you write a certain amount and you stop. That was me forever. That was my continuous horrible writing experience. And it was just on loop. It was like Groundhog Day, horrible writing experience over and over and over. And so that's the biggest one for me. And it's turned out to be honestly the best thing, because if I had just finished it, it wouldn't have been an audio drama. And I don't know what it would have been like. I don't know where it would have gone or, what would have happened to it. So.
And that's really neat. I love that story. And boy, that feels, listeners, if you haven't checked out 2298, obviously we're going to talk about it here in a second, but I'm going to encourage you to, and keep that answer in mind when you do what he just said. I'm not going to say anything more than that. But hey, thank you for that, for opening that part of your story. Because any of us who have ever hung out with writers, we see so many talented people give up the fight when it comes to this stuff. There's a talented person in my local group who has been working on the same few chapters in the 10 months I've been part of the group, because like you were talking about, it's funny when it's not funny. It's there's a close correlation between your answer and what I observe of her behaviors. So I'm going to actually mention this episode to her when it does come out, so she hears it from someone else than me, because she's doing this circular self-defeating thing that you were kind of talking about with your experience. And then, folks, of course, especially for new listeners, and I mentioned learning objectives for why I asked this question. Listen to what he just said. How many times he went back and forth, delete, rewrite. There was one instigating incident maybe that kind of kicked him into that next gear, but he didn't give up. He didn't stop chasing the dream. You know, he stayed dedicated to the story. The story obviously burned for you. It didn't go away. Yeah. You kept revisiting it. And so the tagline of the show from episode 1 was, you know, empowerment through candor, being real. I asked the guests to be real, share their real struggles, because this ain't easy. And in sharing those struggles, we also get to celebrate their successes. Anthony's story is out there. There are tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of people who've already heard it, and it's still, I mean, in the big picture, still a brand new show. He's just at the beginning of growing his audience, and he's already got that much exposure out there because he didn't give up on it, and he didn't quench the fire, and he kept going. I love that story, Anthony. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure. And you know, to your friend, one more thing that I'll say is, for audio drama, for me, I couldn't find my writing voice until I heard what it would actually sound like in my actual voice. And so, you know, if you read 2298, it is different than listening to it, because I've made just certain conscious changes, you know, speaking it aloud into the microphone and thinking, I would say it this way, or I think it should be said this way. I wrote it this way, and that's the general idea, but I'm going to say it this way.
That's a great point. A great tip, tool, and tactic right there, folks. So let's talk about 2298 then, and anything that publicly you want to share with the audience. What is this show about?
So we're not in the spoiler section, right?
Right, we're not in the spoiler section.
Okay.
Patrons for me and Anthony, hang out.
Okay, I got to be safe. So this show is about a profile named Profile 24, who lives in a society that has been created around the only thing that is left on Earth, which is the internet. There's there's very little life, there's very little space or habitable area, and all they have is the transfer of information through the little area that they have, and each of these profiles live in isolation, and they have sort of roles that they get assigned into that contribute to society and to what is left. And number 24 is having a little bit of a problem, though, because of a weird bird and some dreams and a lot of other stuff that is happening. If you haven't listened, I don't want to say too much, but it gets a lot stranger than what I've already talked about for our friend 24. But I feel like that's the best description I can give without giving much away.
Fair enough. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's available wherever folks get any podcast, right?
That is true.
All right. Yeah, so you'll definitely want to check it out. I mean, if you're a fan of my fiction, everything, all the way even to Atheist Apocalypse, there are dystopic elements in all of my stories. So if you're a fan of mine, I definitely encourage you to check it out, because Anthony's definitely got that going on there. I don't want to give anything away yet, and I will tease. Remember, patrons, hang out for a second. We're gonna ask Anthony where folks can find him, and then we're gonna come back and have some questions for Anthony that only you are gonna get to hear. All right, Anthony. So I really appreciate you coming on, and I genuinely mean it, because I truly feel that somebody was helped today with you sharing this part of your journey. So now that folks absolutely in love with you, where can they find you?
So you can find 2298 primarily on Twitter, right? I've said this sort of already. Twitter is my love, my platform. At 2298pod is where you're going to get all the updates and links and connections to everything. All the episodes are on there as well. You can listen to everything right inside Twitter. And so not only is it the news hub, it's everything. And so that's primarily where I would direct you to go at 2298pod. But, like Paul said, you can go to Apple Podcasts, you can go to Overcast, you can go to pretty much any place you listen to podcasts. You can go to SoundCloud, which is my hosting platform. Shout out to SoundCloud. And yeah, I also have a Patreon, which is 2298pod as well. But you can get some cool stuff there. Basically, the best part about that is you get the episode 2 days early on Fate Crafters Friday. So if you are looking for any sort of perk, that's the one.
There we go.
That's where you would find anything.
Are you on? Is the show on Spotify yet?
So I'm not on Spotify yet.
Okay.
Because I submitted it on their website, but I'm not part of the platform that allows it to just automatically happen.
Right.
So
okay.
I don't have that yet, but I hope to get it on there. I'm trying to get it on there. This is I've tweeted at them, so if you want to find that tweet and like it and retweet it to pressure them to add me. Because hey, that works. That's how I got the music for 2298.
I was gonna say, I remember that conversation.
And it totally worked, and I think they're happier for it. So
that is so cool. It's so funny, but it's so cool. All right, listeners, this has been a very fun conversation. Again, Anthony's always out there on Twitter, but maybe you're not a Twitterite. That's totally okay. Go over to pulsating.com, hit the contact tab, and if you've got a question for Anthony and you just don't do Twitter, please don't feel like you can't reach out to him. Him and I are in constant contact, so it's no big deal. I will forward it on to him. And if the network doesn't intercept the message, I'm sure he can get around to answering you on that. Anthony, one more time, thank you very much for coming on Horrible Writing. It's been a pleasure to finally get to meet you and actually have this very important conversation.
It is my honor, and in true self-deprecating nature, I am not worthy.
We're going to leave that public episode with that. And hey, before we get out of here, a real quick programming note. I am getting ready to take my first trip to Europe in 20 years, and therefore, we're not going to have any episodes for the next couple weeks. In fact, the show won't come back until the 22nd of July with episode 46. So here's your chance to catch up on the show and maybe check out some of my audio dramas like Subject Found, which will wrap up the second season at the beginning of July. So you can go binge Diary of a Madman. Go check out the trailer for the new one called Who Killed Julie? Or might even be your chance to go pick up your copy of Chasing the Demon in paperback or digital and fill in this void until you hear from me again. Either way, have a great early part of your summer, and I will see you at the end of July. This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sadin, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse at Writing Horrible and over at paulsadin.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.